Welcome, and thank you for joining us to this roundtable about Barbro Östlihn that we had entitled Barbro Östlihn at the Heart of the Avant-garde Movements, Artistic Networks, Mobility and Circulation, 1960-1980. And it's a roundtable that we have the pleasure to organize in the frame of this exhibition about Barbro Östlihn that has been created by Annika Öhrner. So it's a condensed retrospective of Barbro Östlihn, and it's in fact the first retrospective of her work in France. So we are very, very happy to be able to show her art in France and to make it discovered to a French and international audience here in Paris. It's a very nice way also to have a roundtable here in the exhibition surrounded by her work. And if you haven't had the chance to see the exhibition, it will remain open until 9 tonight and then until the 20th of July. So you still have some weeks to discover the exhibition. My name is Marion Alluchon and I am an art historian as well as a project leader at the Swedish Institute here in Paris. And I work specifically with contemporary art, and I have the pleasure tonight to moderate this discussion. And around me, I'm very happy to have three art historians and experts. Annika Öhrner, you are an associate professor at the Södertörn University in Stockholm. You wrote your PhD about Barbro Östlihn and created numerous exhibitions about art in Sweden and now in France as well. You are an expert in the art of the 20th century, dealing with new ways of looking at and writing art history, specifically looking at critical historiography, transnational transfers, and the history of museums and exhibitions in the 1960s and 1970s. And you have co-directed and directed books and colloquiums about these different networks and connections that have not necessarily been looked about before, like art in transfer in the area of pop art, it's a book that you co-directed, and that was about the reception of pop art beyond the usual US-Europe relation, and this was published in 2017. Or here in Paris, an event that was planned to take place at the Institut suédois, but because it was during the pandemic, took place digitally. A colloquium that you did about cross-border connectivity in Nordic Baltic art in the late 19th and 20th century. And so this was in 2021, and this was upon an invitation by another interesting French art historian that is also dealing with rewriting art history and the history of the avant-garde, Béatrice Joly-Prunel. Agata Jakubowska, you are currently a lecturer at the Institute of Art History at the University in Warsaw, in Poland. You have also several years of research behind you, focusing mainly on women artists in the 20th century. And more recently, your focus has been to search, gather and write a transnational history of exhibitions devoted and involving also women artists. And this project has the title Globalizing the History of Women's Art Exhibitions. And you are also a teacher, you created also many exhibitions, and you're also a member of the editorial team of Avant-garde Critical Studies, but also of the International Initiative team for teaching, e-learning, agency mentoring, which is a program run by Aware, Archives of Women Artists Research and Exhibitions, which is a French non-profit organization whose purpose is to constitute a digital and international archive of women artists, accessible to everyone. And I warmly recommend you to have a look on Google. You just type Aware, Archives, Women Art, and you will find this website that has a lot of, they are doing a lot of things, a lot of events and everything, but they also have this wonderful index of about international women artists that they fulfill all of the time. and it's very, very interesting. And they recently published a notice on Barbro Östlihn, so we are very grateful for that. Yeah, strongly recommend you this website and their work. And last but not least, Pierre Ruault. So you are a PhD student at Université Rennes 2, writing a PhD since 2021 about the transnational dynamics between various French and Swedish neo-avant-garde movements in the post-war period. Your link to Sweden began before, because you wrote a master's thesis about Pontus. That will be, I think, is a very important Swedish figure that we are going to talk about, I guess, a little bit more today. And Pontus is also a figure to which we devote an exhibition right now in our gallery space, just next to the reception. And apart from that, you also teach, write articles, but also do art critiques for contemporary art. So the topic of this round table is not a dissertation about Barbro Östlihn's life, neither a profound analysis of her work, but rather an attempt to understand the importance of networks, mobility and circulation at that time, so let's say in the 1960s, 1980s, and the way they worked and affected artists, their practices and their careers. And for that, and before giving the discussions to my colleagues here, I would like just to set the stage in a few words, so everyone here understands where we are coming from. It's very common things to say that in art history that the 1960s have been a very important turning point in the Western art world. While Paris and some other places in Europe had concentrated all the avant-gardes that had built modernity, modern art by the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. A big shift, suddenly, kind of a big shift happened in the 1950s, 60s. And suddenly the center of the art world transferred from Paris to New York. So from the ancient, cultural, well-educated capital of Europe to the new, modern, uneducated and fearless America. And after that, of course, exaggerating here, but all eyes were on New York and America, and Paris and Europa kind of disappeared as avant-garde places in art. This is how art history has often been written, this is how art history has often been told, and often also lived at that time. One has even written a book whose title is kind of very catchy title, I think, and which is Serge Guibault, a French art historian, who wrote this book, Comment New York vola l'idée d'art moderne, so how New York stole the idea of modern art. This book is about the ascension of abstract expressionism in the late 1940s, and how abstract expressionism was kind of a movement that the US kind of manipulated and included in a political statements to nation brand America. So it's absolutely not the topic here, but I thought that the title is so relevant here to illustrate my purpose. Well, I thought I should bring it here. So New York stole the idea of modern art from Paris, and this is partly true. One of the big events that happened in the 1960s is the Venice Biennale in 1964, where a young, not that young, he was 38 years old already, but a young American artist who was absolutely unknown from the crowd and who was named Robert Rauschenberg, won one of the first prizes at the Venice Biennale. While, and the French critics were kind of very annoyed by that, Roger Bissière, who was a 78 years old painter, French painter, who was well established, member of École de Paris, and who was from France supposed to win this prize, didn't win the prize. He only got the prize of honor. So he was destituted of his prize that was won by this young American Robert Rauschenberg. And 1964 is very important for that, because Robert Rauschenberg was at that time the first American artist to win the d'Or at the Climat de Venise. So there is a shift really that is happening there. But the problem is that by telling the story and telling this storytelling like that, with like making two big poles, Paris or New York, as main avant-garde places, resides in the fact that it completely marginalizes some parts of the world, and I'm only talking here about the Western world. By designing two possible art centers, it neglects other possible art places, other possible art centers and possible platforms for artists to meet, artists to exchange, artists to produce, artists to get inspired, or even create together. And it also neglects the fact that artists are mobile, specifically after the Second World War, and that they don't often think in terms of nation or in terms of in terms of borders, that they usually build networks that are among borders, that are transnational. Barbro Östlihn has lived in these two capitals, so to speak, but in the other way around. She first went to New York, settled down there for about 15 years, and then came back to the old Europa in Paris, where she lived about 20 years and died. But she also began her life journey in Stockholm. And so this is where I would like to start the discussion. Annika Öhrner, you've shown in your PhD thesis how Barbro Östlihn, how strong was the presence and the interest for American avant-garde in Stockholm back in the 1950s, 1960s, precisely when Barbro Östlihn was studying art and just before she flew to New York. Can you tell us a bit more about these relationships between Sweden and America in the early 1960s and how Barbro Östlihn participated in these networks?
Thank you, Marion. Thank you for the introduction and invitation to this talk. Pleasure to speak here. Tonight we are, as you said, leaving a little bit Barbro Östlihn's work aside, because we have it all around us, and there's a long reading for you to see that we go into the context that we were speaking about. The reason why I thought, in terms of the book and the dissertation, that Barbro Östlihn was a very good person and position to study all this context with, is that she had a lot of possession in her biography that shed light on different kind of levels and networking and mobility. First of all, she studied in Stockholm in the 50s, both at Konstfack and at the Royal Art Academy. And she actually had her student studio just 150 meters from Modern Museum, which was then constructed as the site where the new art should be presented, opened in 58. The position of Modern Museum in Stockholm, it has been extremely fetishized in a way, and also the role of the new director, because it has been planned for several decades to open the Modern Museum in Stockholm, which, I mean, it was a late thing to happen, 58. But still, but still, it is very important to know, in terms of center and periphery, that Modern Museum in Stockholm was a place that had the first American art show in Europe, for a reason. And if you follow the work for example, the American Pop Art Show, and go into the archives that a few of us have done, it was amazing the speed in which Modern Museum Sweden actually arranged this show. And one key for understanding the networks is through Barbro and her relationship to the gallery system, but also the museum's relations to the system, because they were completely, it was not just one clever idea of a clever curatorial idea, it was also a group of artists in New York that really wanted this to happen, and then there was the gallerists. Collier, Sonavent, etc., that needed to create a market in Europe for pop art, which was up to them, not the choice of Upper East Side art collectors to go to. They were more keen, maybe collecting impressionists and so on, if you, I mean, this is very general speaking. So, in order to present the validity of the strange new pop art, they could sort of refer to the museum exhibition in Stockholm at the time. So it happened to be, by biographical reasons, the very heart of what was going on that Barbro had. She went together with her second husband, which was Erling Fahlström. You might know about him, he's a very important Swedish artist. And they came to New York in there in 1961. And she had, we can come back to this maybe, but she had a very rare position as a female artist to be able to exhibit with a few galleries that also have good art criticism, if you compare with that. Because this was a scene in Manhattan where most galleries not only did not exhibit women, they had as a policy. Because, I mean, they policy, you don't do that. Because they don't sell. It's easy, and that's some truth that is still valid more or less today. You go into the auction system, there is a very strange people about that. But she being positioned in their studio at Front Street with Erling Fahlström, and also in the close friendship that she had with Robert Rauschenberg, who loved her work. He had been in Stockholm 61 for the exhibition. And also Klaus Oldenburg, that you all know, of course, is a Swede. Not, but he was one of the Swedes and came to the States in the 70s. So there was a little clique of young artists who really whispered to Bonsultien and told Madame Lucille where to go for the best work, and convinced the other pop artists and art, etc., to lend the works to a few of the auctions. There were several, more than one in Madame Lucille. So you have the gallery system, you have artist network, and also the willingness, also, of course, of artists to be presented.
So the artists supported each other both ways. Maybe. Yeah. And this helped really Barbro to settle down in New York with her husband at the time.
Yeah. So she took they had the studio after Rauschenberg. He moved out and they
And so it was really two ways. American artists who came to New York for this exhibition in 1961, they got interested into Swedish artists that were there. And did they bring other artists at that moment, or was it only because Barbro very Boston flew to New York that helped this collection? Or do you mean
other Swedish artists? Well, there was Utrecht, for example. There was a few of them. But also there is also maybe other larger questions about how we write art history, because if you go down to, for example, a lot of European examples, we already have the pop art language in Europe before the Americans came. We did that, so it's not like we did that afterwards.
Pierre, would you like to tell us more about
yes, maybe a good example of collaboration between Swedish and American artists is, for example, for the second exhibition of Erling Fahlström in the gallery Daniel Cordier. Robert Rauschenberg, Fahlström commanded a text by Robert Rauschenberg, and you see the connection between American and Swedish artists become before the move in New York, but with different network in Europe for Europe. For example, for Oliver Fastrom, it's very interesting because when he participates to the Daniel Cordier selection artist, is a very interesting moment of transition of this aesthetic, because in the Daniel Cordier artists, you have many surrealist artists, like Henri Michaud, for example, in 1959, the Gallery Daniel Cordier organized Eros International Exhibition of Surrealists, but it's also the first gallery in France to exhibit neo-Dadaist American artists like Robert Rauschenberg. And I think it's a very interesting aspect of that, because it is the same moment of Fastrom want to move in New York, and we have the possibility to move in New York in this moment now. But for the question of center and periphery, it's interesting to understand before this symbolic movement of Gina de Venise in 1954, many American artists like Rauschenberg have more possibility to expose in Europe to compare with the situation of America, because they have a very different aesthetic to compare with expressionist art, for example. And France and Sweden is a very good place for American artists to have the possibility to expose and to develop and collaborate with other artists during this period. And it is very interesting because the modern musette is a very big example of the connection, a point connection point with different network. Because in 1961, the Modern Musette creates a movement of art exhibition. It's the first big exhibition of consultant to expose synergic artists and nouveau realist artists and American artists. And during the exhibition, you have a creation of many connection. A creation of many meeting of connection between Swedish artists, French artists, and American artists. In art history, Modern Musette is very famous for the first museum to exhibit pop art, but in reality, it's also the first museum to exhibit nouveau realist movement. It's the equivalent of pop art movement in France. It's a simplest, but yes, I think it's very interesting. The art history just to replace this aspect about French, about the importance of the Swedish, the Stockholm place for French artists, for example.
Yeah, maybe you can tell us more about the Swedish artists in France as well at that moment.
Yes.
That will come a little bit later. She came in 1975 and 1976, so it's not really that long, even though she is quite often in Europe and in Paris, and she lives in Europe,
Yes.
but she came in 1968 for the exhibition.
She came, I think, during the summer with Oliver Fastrom. When you see the correspondence of Fastrom and Östlihn in Kunglia Bibliothèque, you see different later about the different summer experience for Fastrom and for Barbro, because it's a good occasion for visit exhibition, for visit friends in Paris and in other cities in Europe.
So how is the relationship between Sweden and France at that moment? Could you tell us a bit more about Swedish artists coming to France and exhibiting in France, or French artists exhibiting in Sweden? I know it's a very big chapter.
Yeah, very. Maybe it's for start this difficult question. The good example is the Pontac exhibition. Is a very big exhibition. It's the first exhibition organized in the French museum institution about the new avant-garde, the new Swedish avant-garde in 1968. You have 5 young artists, male artists, of course, because it is the bad reality of this world. But it's 5 artists. We represent different aspects of modernity or avant-garde aesthetic in Europe and in Sweden For example, you have all smelting, where represents the geometrical abstraction aspect. And you know you have many links with this concrete painting during 1950 between Sweden and France with the Galerie Denis René. But you have also Irving Fastrom and Catholic Protestbar, and it is very interesting because the two represents this first poetic experimental artwork. For example, he published the first poem in 1961 in the Rix art magazine, and it's the first publication of poem in history to Fastrom. It's his first experience to publish in this moment. He doesn't have the possibility to publish in Sweden in the same moment. But this alternative network is very interesting for this artist, but after that, the advantage of peripheral artists or semi-peripheral artists is to resist or to resist to the aesthetic debate in France, for example. For Fastrom, he has the ability to exhibit with surrealists, but also with other art movements like pop art, but also figuration narrative in the same moment. And I think it's the advantage of Swedish artists in this moment.
It's easier to be not categorized in one group or one movement when you are coming from abroad.
Yes.
It gives you a kind of independency that you might not have. Annika, do you feel it's something that Barbro took advantage also in her career, or are these questions absolutely different with her?
The female musician, right? Taking departure on a pontat, and when you before you came here, you might have seen the invitation to this round table and this photograph where you see that it's all two persons struggle with installing a work called Dr. Livingstone, etc. by Irving Fastrom. We also have it in the exhibition in the second documentary room on the other side. And I love that image in a way because it tells us in what ways we have to go and look in order to really understand the mechanism of how to make yourself a space. And it's not just about Barbro. She was as you already know, producing the work of Irving Fastrom, and actually they also both signed one work. And he was very openly in the 60s published essays where he said, I just looked at it, I just took this painting and decided it because she had made the work for it. And of course, they were very clear and very independent artists in a way. Her works and his work are very separate, both conceptually and practically. But it was a way to be part of all this, and which also says more about all the other women who didn't have even that chance. So, and also we can talk about Nikki Sanfal and the productions like Home in Stockholm, who is a site of conflict, in fact, instead of some very, very nice collaborative, the guys with the girls thing, if you go into details. And there are more examples, and I think also you have some examples of that kind.
Yes, this, our subject is so rich. I have so many thoughts now. But I will try to share with you some of the examples here. What comes to my mind first is a very specific example of an artist, Polish artist, Magdalena Bakanowicz, that you may know or not know, who has some connection to Sweden actually also, but who is an example, and also as a good example to what you just said about this marginal position as being actually attractive. Because I will tell quickly that she was a textile artist, and she actually made her entry into the art world, textile art world, when she exhibited at the first Biennale, Lausanne Biennale, 62, it was 62. And it was really a revelation for many people there, because there was a huge discussion about how women artists from Eastern Europe, and Magdalena Abramovich was one of them, another one was Agata Jakubowska from Croatia, and there were several other women mentioned, but they were the two most important. These two, how they actually went, how they did not follow what was expected, how they did not follow the old French tapestries techniques, how they proposed something completely different. For different reasons they did it. They just also for some kind of economic reasons, they did not have access to workshops, they did not have access to good quality materials, so they proposed something completely different. It was a revelation in the 62. And it actually started Magdalena Abramovich's career in Europe, in the US, from this marginal position somehow, yes, as proposing something different. But she's also, when you look at her career, and also, for example, at her exhibitions in Sweden, it's interesting to observe, and I think it's a more general, it's not women-related remark, but it's more general remark, that when actually, it was also mentioned already that when we talk about this exchanges, we have some kind of official exchanges, yes, like being part of cultural diplomacy when you have, for example, pianist in these are representations of countries, yes, that are shown there. But also, for example, following this example of Magdalena Abramovich, I'm sorry, I repeat too often example. So there were exhibitions of Polish textile art organized by Polish government, and they were organized, for example, in Sweden and other Nordic countries. But there were also solo exhibitions of Magdalena Abramovich, and she used completely different ways of organizing them. I mean, they needed to be accepted by the government, but she used personal contacts she established in Sweden to have these exhibitions, and so we have these two different tracks, I would say. But also, Abramovich is really an exception in terms of making a career, what we call a career, because many other women artists did actually what Barbro Östlihn did. So they went to New York, they went to Paris, and they actually established some sort of career, let's say, but it was not that well. Actually, we should maybe think how to measure success. But if we think about, but they were not visible, I would say. Maybe this is one way to measure it.
Yeah, I think if I may, if you follow your colleague Piotr Piotrowski's, which is one of the most important European art historians, even though he's unluckily deceased, his basic idea of how to do art history, and which is simply you cannot study the art without studying the politics. And when it comes to Sweden, we had a very, very strong country policy. So, for example, Abramovich's most important early work was actually staged in the hospital of Huddinge. For those of you who know about it, it happens to be 400 meters away from my university as well. So she did a big textile installation, which is what today anyone who knows about public art and textiles, it's forbidden today to have textiles of that kind. And it's actually lost because someone took it away and we don't know where it is. But there were money in Sweden, there were initiatives like that. And it also plays in when we talk about transnational relationships or artist networks, because like the Pentathlon example, and you mentioned it was just guys, but it was also not only a network between Constantine and guys and a few friends in Paris. It was a highly national state matter. It wasn't very, in the archive, as you have, it was very, very expensive. The party cost 20,000 francs more than it should, etc., etc. It was on the highest political level on both sides, and not on the Swedish side. So it came with a lot of subsidies, and state policy and country policy plays in very much. But it's like what Pierre says, it's like a hidden economy. You shouldn't talk about it. But I think we should talk about it so that we understand the logics properly.
I can add something to listen to continue with this. I think that if we are talking about women artists, it's very interesting to think about actually exactly conditions of this mobility, conditions of mobility, let's say, like this. So, and it relates to many different aspects of life, because when we think about women artists moving to Paris, it's also interesting to think historically. For many years, now I think about the end of the 19th century, beginning of 20th century, many women artists came here because that's where they could study. Yes, it's quite obvious, but it's true. And they did not come only to Paris, but they also, just to make geography more complicated, they went also to Munich, for example, they went to St. Petersburg, to the cities where it was possible for women to study at the art academies. Obviously, in the 60s, it's not the case. They don't come to study here, but they have more, let's say, more career-oriented reasons to come here. But if we think about, as I said, conditions, it's always interesting to ask, what about their families? I mean, did they come alone? What about their children? It's an interesting case for Barbro. So what about their children? What about their parents? What about also, we started talking about living conditions, but I think about this care work. But actually, today we tend to think that maybe it's not only the women's issue, but it has always been more the women's issue. But this care work that actually make them more or less mobile, yes, and it also decided on how they could start a new living in a new place. So many of them, and that's again this case here that we are discussing, that many of them lived in between. They actually did not move completely into a new place, but they somehow, because of these family issues usually, they lived in between two countries, between two cities.
Maybe for the question of female artists, it is interesting to compare with the situation of female art dealer in the same period, because in Paris, in Stockholm, and maybe in New York, but I'm not sure, you have many female art dealers. We have a very important responsibility in this moment. Maybe, for example, very interesting example, in Paris you have Denise René, Iris Claire, in Stockholm you have Années and Eva of Boulogne. And it is interesting because it's four women with very independent economic aspect. They have the possibility to develop exhibition and other, because they are economic independence, maybe sunshine, not family or not child, and it is this only during this period is the only format for our important career in this art world is for a woman is art dealer with not children and a reputation of a fantasist woman, for example, is a little cliché, but when you see the different commentaires on different boutiques, you have the similitude of these four women, very elegant, very fantasist, a little strange, yeah. But this woman is very important. For example, in Swedish art history, Pontus Hultén is the hegemonic, other hegemonic place for the creation of modern and other example. But Pontus Hultén, for develop this different network, we have he created link with these different women. Denise René in Paris. Denise René, it is in Paris we have the possibility to develop, to create the first exhibition about cinematic art, and also you have the same similar situation in Stockholm with Agnes Wilden. And I think it's very important to conserve the name of this art dealer, because they are essential for many artists. For example, for Jean Tinguely, Agnes Wilden, Jean Tinguely is a Parisian and a Switzerland artist. It is a very good friend of Pontus Hultén. He very famous for the Cinetic machine. And when you see the different catalog and book, you have the only story about the friendship between Jean Tinguely, Pontus Hultén, the first exhibition in Paris, the first exhibition in Stockholm. But for the economic reality, Agnes Wilden created a link with different art collectors in Sweden. For Jean Tinguely, the most famous is Tito Arenberg, for example. But it is very important for the reality of life, the reality of artist life during this period.
I have plenty of questions, but the first one, because we are talking about strategy and women also playing, elaborating strategies to be able to exhibit in their own countries, but also elsewhere. With the case with Magdalena Bakanovich, was she showing the same kind of artworks when she was exhibiting with a state exhibition, as when she was exhibiting like more private social exhibition that she had arranged herself, or was she adapting to the commissioners and also to the audience?
No, she was showing the same works, these works that were available, and I think it's more or less the case with other artists as well. When I thought about it, I wanted rather to underline that we have these different kind of circles, yes, for exhibiting art, but also it's coming back maybe to this notion about living in between. With many of these artists, it's not only about women, but many of these artists exhibited in their home countries, let's say like this, and in these countries where they lived at the time. Yes, so it's interesting to actually to see how they were received in these different places. For example, I can give another example of a Polish artist, this time connected to Paris, Alina Szapocznikow, who actually spent two periods in Paris. First, she was here at the end of the 40s for about 4 or 5 years. And then she came back here in 63 and stayed until 73 when she died here. And when she lived in Poland, in Warsaw, she developed her career. She was well received, but she still decided to go to Paris with her husband, who earned money, again in good conditions, who supported her financially. He was a graphic designer, Roman Cieślewicz. But she left Poland, having a career in Poland, but she still wanted to have more international career, let's say, and she thought that Paris offers her more possibilities. And then when she came back from time to time to Poland, because she had her studio for some years in Warsaw, and when she came back and showed her works created here in Paris, the Polish critics were skeptical. Polish critics said something like, But you know, it's strange. This art in France. she was close to new realist. This kind of. She started using polyester, polyurethane, this kind of new materials. And in Poland, it was considered as a kind of even like betraying the true art at that time. So it's also another more general question about actually what you. I imagine that what you gain when you leave your country and what you lose when you leave your country. It's also this more general question. It's because for people in Poland, it's often the case. I'm sure it's also the case for Sweden. Staying in New York or in Paris, it's something big. It's considered as a kind of gained as a kind of success, let's say. But also, it does not always mean that the situation is better in this new place. So it's a little bit another subject. But it's a general question about actually what we gain and what we lose.
Yeah, and it points also to us as auditorians, as viewers of the art of these persons, that we really also have to fight we're sort of auditorians are marinating in the history of, the development of abstraction and who was first and what is center, what is periphery. In the end of the day, that is not relevant as practice, in my opinion. We have to go directly to the work, which is also something that maybe our generation of art historians can dig up and show people. People could see these things, which is, I think, still I really feel a little bit not ashamed, but surprised is the word, that these paintings were not so widely known in Sweden in the 70s or 80s even, or in the 90s. That in itself is a question that we need to be aware of and sort of be very quick criticize our own way of doing things.
Because I understand that if you will compare this to artists, for example, Barbro Östlihn and Agata, so I understand that she did not keep her studio in Stockholm, and when she came to Stockholm during summers, she did not work there and did not exhibit.
They had a small little flat in the old town in Gamla stan where some of the works were made, and she had kids in Stockholm. Most of them, and as you said, there is a huge price on the private level for these women, for these kids also. That is happening.
But Barbro exhibited, she had some exhibitions in Stockholm.
A lot of the work we see here was exhibited in 1968 for the first time in Stockholm, and while she had got quite decent reviews from Donald Judd and appreciated by Barbro Östlihn, etc. This was a very politicized and very maybe sometimes square idea of what art should be, so it wasn't that great criticism, quite fun to read actually. They were boring, there were no people in these images, they were boring. If you look at them too much, you sort of die of boredom, nothing happens, and so on and so on. So it's so like a school example of that the context is all. It's everything, and we need to be careful when we look at work, so to not reproduce the former context. And in order to really study them, like for example, the archival work is good, and I'm using occasional times to use documentary photo and the not published ones by Hammarsjö and Strömholm, and what was not published, and then suddenly you see things that you can tell stories in another way than in the introductions of the exhibition catalogs of the time.
So looking at the periphery, you understand better the center. Maybe we should...
Just for understand the rivalry between Paris and New York, Stockholm is the best place for observe this rivalry on the question of love and age in the same moment. This is a perfect place for observe this rivalry, I think.
the Swedish people telling you about this reality, or?
Because I think because Madame Solange is a good. You have many French and American artists to move in Sweden for exhibit and other reasons, etc. But also because I think it is very interesting to play between with, okay, now I expose American artists, but after I expose more French artists. And for example, Pontustel was very critiqued by the Swedish artists and art critic for the American politics. But sometimes you play with, okay, France is maybe a more political orientation, but after I just to expose another American artist, you have, for example, the is a reaction of anti-American reaction about Niki Saint-Phage, Antinguely, etc. But after you have the exhibition of Oldenburg in the same place. I think it's interesting to see this rivalry in this museum in this place. Yes.
Quite a strategy.
Yeah. I think so.
Do you have any questions here in the audience? You can ask questions in Swedish, English, or French. And we will choose the language. And Polish. But then, yeah, of course.
Maybe I have a little question for you. But where's the link with the French art critique on the Polish art scene? Because I know with Pierre Ruault and also French art critique. On the ICA network, you have many links with Poland and France in this period. And for your specific artist, you have an example of this relationship between the French art critique and Poland artists, for example.
I don't think we have met always. I think Pierre Ruault definitely is the most important person, and exactly as you said, the ICA congresses, they were crucial, and Pierre Ruault actually met Kalina Szapocznikow during ICA Congress in Warsaw, and he also was interested in Czechoslovakia artists, and he created this kind of a network, we could say, with these artists. So I think he was the most influential, but it's again a thing. If we come back to the beginning of our discussion about the artists being interested in, I think that actually critics were more important in terms of Eastern Europe, for example, that there were not so many artists from France, US or Sweden coming to Eastern European countries.
Eric Delman a little in Czech during the 1960s. Delman participated to the avant-garde, Czechoslovakia avant-garde in this period. Maybe the only exception.
Yes, I don't want to say that there were no artists like this, but I want to say that there were, for example, exhibitions. Again, we come back to this cultural diplomacy. There were exhibitions organized of French art or American art in Eastern European countries, but these were curators and, I don't know, politicians and critics sometimes who were involved, not artists themselves. So obviously there were some areas, but there were some, for example, like sculptural plenaires that were meetings for international community of artists, and then we have all the other networks like Mayart network, for example, but it's also it's a completely different thing. But we have performance festivals, for example, that also bring different people from artists. Then these are artists. But with painting, it's interesting how it changed, how it is related to media actually. With paintings, I think that these were more that paintings traveled, and not not exactly the painters who did them. But I also have a very general more question maybe for Annika, and it's actually related to our subject somehow, and it's a question that I'm asking myself often. So maybe that you talked about how art history is written. You underlined that it's important to reflect on it. And our history and our art histories and also exhibitions are very much always nation-oriented. Yes? So we have like exhibitions of Swedish art, French art, American, and so on and so on. So then, if we have paintings painted by Barbro Östlihn in New York, is it Swedish art? So it's maybe to the audience also. So because I have the same question, I have the same problem with Annika Öhrner, for example, with what's made in Paris. Is it Polish art or no?
But you pointed to the thing that, I mean, which connects to the notion of transnational transfer, is that you sort of, are you representing a nation? Sometimes you are, but in these cases you are not. And what you need is some kind of someone has to acknowledge what you do. And Södertörn, who you might think that he was sort of commuting over the Atlantic, he did not. He traveled very rarely. He didn't like sitting in an airplane. But he was there in '64 and went up to Avec and Barbro and talked with them about his art. And I went out. I have this, well, maybe already, this point already done in the catalogue. And then a couple of days later, Tiny came up and said, well, that's a good painting, Barbro said. And that he pointed at pawn shop, the red one, in the other space. And then the day after, came back and pointed at the painting and said, that's a good painting, Barbro. And that is now, that was the first accession to Madame Siet in Sweden. So you recognize.
I have also a last question about Barbro Östlihn. How would you consider her career? Did she have a good career while she was living? And how was she also, how was the work received in Sweden? Was she considered as like the born Swedish but then foreign artist that left Sweden for so many places and now you don't really look at her work? Or what would you say?
Well, she had a few exhibitions. She was much later than her male colleagues from Konstfack and Konsthögskolan chosen to be a member of the Art Academy, and which is kind of not so good because they have stipends and stuff. So, well, if we talk about what's a success, I think she had a great success just by looking at what she did. She produced great art. But it was, an artist's life is never very easy, and the last 20 years in Paris were not, I guess, because it was quite a tough situation in many ways, even though she had gallery and she did exhibit. But I don't think, well, that's, again, to finance an artist's life is never a very easy thing. It's for everyone, maybe.
And her reception in Sweden?
The reception in Sweden, when it comes to at the millennium, there were several new books about, 20th century art in Sweden, and then she was always in sort of named. But then after that, nowadays I think she's quite well known. So it's like Hilma Klint, it's another Swedish example, who produced paintings in the 1910s, which started to exhibit after 1985. So they're coming, one day or another, but you have to wait some. So.
How many works are there in total?
Oh, I think that question, not so many, because they is work intense. So I think it's like, I should have counted that now, 150, 200. Mm-hmm. Because one of these takes like 3-4 months, and they all painted during night time in artificial light.
So do most of them come from her estate?
No, I wouldn't say so. It's from private owners and also from museums, and not so many from the estate, but some.
that she liked, were most of them from her own estate, or were they already sold at that time?
By that time, there were a few paintings at Moderna Museet and a few other. We have Gothenburg and Norrköping and Västerås in art museums already, and after that, even more.
Can I follow up with a question?
Hmm?
So, would you say that the main collectors of her work were based more in the United States, or she also had collectors in Sweden? People who
She had
buy-
more collectors in Sweden, I would say.
She did.
Yeah, and there are a few works still in the state, like single works by, like, for example, one of the most interesting paintings that we don't have here was the one that Lord Rauschenberg bought, and now is, I think, out on the market already. I think I have this sunflower.
So when she exhibited in American Gallery, did she sell a lot
Yeah,
of
some
exhibits
single ones, yeah.
to many American
Yeah.
collectors?
Yes, right. And then there was Daniel Codier, because he co-managed the gallery in Manhattan with Ekström, which is, he was as Swedish as it sounds. So they were, and he actually really also enjoyed her paintings, and he has disposed of his collection in 2 steps, I mean, or in 1 step, because when he was retiring, he did that, and then he wanted to keep out 2 paintings. And then, of course, when he deceased, they come out to the market and you find them on the other side of this wall. And that is, I guess, 2 of them, one very, if you should say so. They were good, but they were very good. So that is the French connection in a way.
Yes, can you talk about the techniques of these paintings? How did you paint them?
Have you seen the film?
No.
Which is the best answer. There was the Swedish television was here in 1983 to visit her studio, so that is a good answer to see that. And it's a whole procedure. We have also reproduction of her working books there. She made walks on Manhattan. She found certain facades. She photographed them, and they are all always true to the actual position where she took those photos. So even though she changed nuances and colors, the disposition of the height and width on the building is preserved in the painting. So she spent a lot of time, 2-3 weeks in the beginning, to decide all that and to make small squares. But after that, it was like 2 months just go on and do what she has decided in a way. But they're quite work intense. And I guess the film is the best part to have that, because she's really lovely in that film.
No, there are no other questions. Yes?
What family did you come from? How did you become an artist? Was that an easy choice for her or a difficult one?
She was from a higher middle class family, and her father was in building market, and she was probably served the importance of architecture and so on through her education. And she was a dropout and not so good in school, so they thought that, well, then she can make good Konstverk instead, and there she developed herself artistically.
Well, I guess we're gonna close the discussion here. It's quite warm, so so we're gonna go outside, and the fika, our cafe, is open until 9:30. So if you want to fresh up with a nice glass of wine or of Swedish lemonade. We can stay a bit more in the courtyard, and the exhibition will reopen and be open until 9 o'clock tonight. Thank you.